thank you for the Montana World Affairs Council for having me here in Bozeman, and thank you to the Bozeman Public Library. And I want to acknowledge those that came and have taken their time to be here. I appreciate it. It's really nice to be back in Montana because this is actually where the idea for this program was conceived. I was supposed to give this talk in April of 24 when I was last here, but things happened, and now I'm giving it, and it's a much more complete presentation. And funny enough, where this, Dr. Mehrdad Kia was also an impetus, and I'll get to that in a minute. So what I'm going to do first is sort of set the tone philosophically, my influences and catalysts, and then I'll present some empirical work from firsthand work with researchers. I'm an editor for a business school faculty research site, which I founded in like 2003, and I am still the editor to this day. And so you'll kind of see these threads in this. And so this is just sort of something that came to me in putting this together. The harm and violence against women, the exploitation and devaluing of, only destroys the fabric of our communities, countries, prospects, and peace and prosperity of the globe. If we think deeply about this, it's true. So sort of how this began was I was here at University of Montana in Missoula, October 10th, 3 days after Hamas attacked Israel. And this was a post I was responding to, as all the news started coming out about the violence. I was responding to this post on LinkedIn, and I just said, I've been with the Pacific Northwest Consul of Israel, who was supposed to speak at this Middle East conference. He didn't show up, but he was webcast in. And he said, don't look away from this. And so I was just saying this in response to this LinkedIn post that, I won't look away either, and I'll do whatever I can. And this is the bridge from University of Montana in Missoula, and this sort of became part of why I titled this Building Bridges, Building Economies. And this is some village women in India, and my nephew served there at this remote village, and I'll mention that in a minute too. So I want to go through some cases, and again, these are projects and research that I've actually been involved in, and some firsthand influences and research. And so one of them is this nonprofit in India, and I actually first met she's now this world-renowned humanitarian named Mata Amritanandamayi, commonly known as Amma, and many know her as the Hugging Saint. And I met her in 1990 in London when I was a student, actually. And in 2023, when India held the G20 presidency, it was in fact her group, the nonprofit, they call it Embracing the World, that was the chair of the C20, which is in fact the civil society organization, and they actually were instrumental in doing a lot of the messaging for the Indian government when they were, relaying their thoughts of what they wanted to present to the world. And so she was sort of like the inspiration for a lot of what India was presenting. And it was ironic to me because here, 33 years later, she's become so renowned. And this nonprofit, they're first on the ground often in crises, when Ukrainians were fleeing for safety. This particular program, the women that I just mentioned, was called Amrita Sri, and this has been around for well over a decade, and it came out of the tsunami where they were having to rebuild, and Amma was like, we need to give women skills they can use so that they can, earn a living, empower themselves, and it's become really broadly across India. The Indian government acknowledges it, and they've done amazing things. And this is just a quote about, the positive role of women in the economy. But I want to read something too, and this was actually from a 2002. This was kind of some of the early impetus for this women's talk. So in 2002, in Geneva, at a UN Global Peace Initiative, she delivered an address about women. So this was 22 years ago. And what's really remarkable about what I'm about to read is it's just as applicable now as it was then. And it was really kind of groundbreaking if you think about, this little 4-foot-tall 11 Indian woman who won the Gandhi King Award for peace, little known, and really giving this call to women. And she said, "Women need to wake up. This applies to women all over the world. Women in countries where materialism is predominant should awaken to spirituality, and women in countries where they are forced to remain inside the narrow walls of religious tradition should awaken to modern thinking. It is widely believed that women and the cultures in which they live will awaken through education and material development, but time has taught us this concept is too limited. Only when women imbibe the eternal wisdom of spirituality along with modern education will the power within them awaken and they will rise to action. What obstructs her awakening? In truth, no external power can possibly obstruct woman or her innate qualities of love, empathy, and patience. It is she and she alone who has to awaken herself. A woman's mind is the only real barrier that prevents this from happening." And so I think that's a really, that's something that's part of the inspiration for doing this. And this was just, an acknowledgement of her work. This Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Muhammad Yunus, he's now heading the transitional government of Bangladesh, and he's, so she's very renowned, and you can look up her work online. So now moving on to some work that I've done as a research editor. I run across a lot of research. I've probably profiled I've probably conducted 500 interviews and profiled 500 pieces of research in the last 20 years in business disciplines. So it can be strategy, finance, information technology, all the different accounting. And there was a professor of late, Wendy Bradley, and I just thought her work was really groundbreaking. And just in the last couple of years only have I started seeing more women's research that I thought was really interesting. And this was a work that I profiled, and it was actually, her and her co-author went to Sierra Leone right before the pandemic. And Sierra Leone is this country that has been rife with civil war for decades. They were ground zero of the Ebola virus. So basically their economy was just waylaid. And what they realized in 2023, they have this policy where like a third of jobs are to be reserved for women, and there's in fact fines if there's not compliance. And so a really aggressive approach to including women in the economy, because they realize it's really vital. And so she and I, and there's some other work I'm going to also mention, some of her work in digital infrastructure and technology. So she and I, on January 3rd, we both spent a lot of time. I was going back over her research, and we decided, and I wanted to interview her. And originally, she was going to be on a panel with me for this talk, but so we decided to do this instead. And so we really did a deep dive, and this video, in fact, is on my website, the full video. But I'm going to share just a little bit of her work. Oh, I have to.
So specifically.
Okay.
So specifically, the paper challenged assumptions that women universally have lower entrepreneurial intentions than men. It also highlighted that context matters. So the drivers of entrepreneurial intentions differ substantially between high and low income countries, and then even across low income countries. So it's a good reminder to be cautious whenever you're overgeneralizing anything. Yeah. And I think last, it's important because we found that women were really rational in their decision making, and they simply weighed the trade-offs as any individual would between what they'd make in various employment situations. Though the women students believed entrepreneurship left them better off. And entrepreneurship is really hard whether you're in a high or low income area, and I think as scholars and researchers we should just think more about why these women thought salaried employment seemed so unattractive. So is it in terms of the finances specifically? So is that about the childcare, just strict wages, promotion opportunities? And I think it'd be important to tease apart that at a later point.
So basically, she was talking about that they'd done this research in Sierra Leone, and actually the study was conducted with men and women that were students, and trying to see if women wanted to be entrepreneurs more than men, and why, and trying to tease that apart. And so basically what she's saying is, women are really rational when they weigh these choices. There's a lot of times there's this stereotype about, oh, women, think emotionally. Well, it's not that at all. They're weighing the pros and cons. And in Sierra Leone, they actually thought they would make more money as entrepreneurs than being salary employees. And so what she was also saying is just that it challenges these assumptions, these stereotypes that are held about how women, come to decisions. And so I thought that was interesting. And also just context matters. And this is really true whether you're in a developing country or an advanced economy. Whether you're in Montana, whether you're in New York, Dallas, it doesn't matter. It's your context, with what you have to operate with, what your opportunities are and your choices that you can make. And so she was just saying too that, because there's a lot of research in advanced economies and it gets projected onto developing economies. And so that's what I thought was interesting about this research, as well as this is just that. We talk about this in the full video too, about the policy that the president of Sierra Leone passed recently. There can even be jail time. And India has also done the same. I know the Consul General of India has been here, and I heard his India presentation last year, and they too are reserving like a third of spots in government for women. And so it's really women empowering women and then policy empowering women. I've got to get back to this video. Excuse me. Okay, I'm going to play the rest. And this is pivoting now. This is talking about some specific opportunities for women in the digital economy, because this is another area of Wendy's that I found really interesting. And again, there's a full video about it, and it might lend itself to some ideas.
So specifically, the paper challenged assumptions that women universally have lower entrepreneurship.
Okay, I've got to get past that. There we go.
Thinking about this, it's really an important intersection. I do feel obligated to say this is extrapolating well beyond the bounds of my research, but based on what I've read and some of my opinions, I would say for women in digital technology, there are a lot of opportunities. And thinking about the paper on born digital firms, if it's true that born digital firms can effectively compete at smaller scales, this would be a great entry point for female entrepreneurs who face barriers to traditional means of accessing capital. And if there are opportunities to compete with superstar firms by being a niche player or reaching global markets, this could also benefit female entrepreneurs who, again, traditionally have trouble compared to their male counterparts accessing markets or lack capital investment or lack the social capital. So I think those are, if those findings extend beyond the metaverse, that's really exciting for women. At the same time, there'll be challenges. So if big data advantages and network effects create powerful barriers to entry and favor established players, then we know incumbent firms are largely male dominated. And so this could just exacerbate gender imbalances. And if there is, I just made this up, this barbell industry structure, which, as you said, the missing middle, it suggests that if women are trying to scale their ventures, so if they have trouble accessing capital, specifically venture capital, to scale to sort of go from small to middle, then this would pose an additional challenge. And
okay, let me get back to play, and I will explain that a little bit. So she did this research, and basically it was showing that, big tech, has all these data advantages. We see this a lot of late with the AI push, the Metas, the Googles, the Amazons, very much incumbents with all these advantages. And what she found in this research that she did about when it was Facebook at the time is just that, the big are getting bigger, bigger firms are getting bigger. They have all these advantages, including big data, but there's a lot of niche opportunities. And so she was just talking about, that a digital firm, born digital, meaning you start out digital, you start out online, is a way to compete. It's a way for women to do things. I myself, have a digital firm. I mean, I have a communications consultancy, but, I coded my first website in 1996, and I've kept up with it since and evolved, with things. And it's my presence. I know others. I know a young woman in Cambodia that just started a business, and they do ship a product out around the world, but that's how they started. And and her market is in the United States. She found this market, and they're just like going like gangbusters. So, and then the other point, she was just saying that that digital technology is asset light, so you can start it up without a lot of money, for one, and it's also anonymous. So there's a gender neutrality to it, right? So you don't have to worry about the tech bro problem or things like that, and it crosses national borders, so you can immediately be global. Born digital firms it's easier for them to start up and go global. So she was also just talking about how this will help with reduce some of the bias of working with founders and already established firms. And this is just some of my work, actually, just that came out recently. And it was really 2 years of my own R&D. Really, I went to some tech disruption conferences at the Federal Reserve Bank across the country, started learning about LLMs back in May of 2023, right before NVIDIA broke out. Learning from semiconductor experts. So I've sort of been following everything that's been going on with the big AI push and data center push and all of it. And I'd been working on it, and it came out just in March, but I had started, like I said, 2.5 years ago, pretty much. And then last piece of research. Now this was done in the United States, and the authors were these two here with me on interview, and again, this is for the Cox School of Business research site that I am the editor for. And so it took them a long time and to find the statistical methodologies to be able to prove this, but they did prove that there was gender bias in a specific way. And for one, it was in the financial services industry. It was in the mortgage lending area, and they did this massive panel study, and they used some really cool Nobel Prize winning research. And you can look these up too. I mean, these are all online. And what was really interesting was that they absolutely found that there was discrimination against women, but it was by both men and women, and that there was stereotyping behavior by women and men. And that women, and so these are women that were like starting out and then trying to get to the next level, just trying to move up. So it's called like the broken rung rather than the glass ceiling. There's been a lot of research on the glass ceiling that, women have a hard time getting to the C-suite. Well, in some instances, they're having a hard time just getting to the next rung. And so this was what was really, really notable to me about it. And so what they showed, and it's in this summary, and then there's a whole research paper behind it, that women were being held to higher standards than men. The bar was higher, and therefore it made advancing more challenging. And the Nobel Peace Prize winner that was in the study as well was saying, in doing this, in not hiring the right people, the most qualified people, we're undermining our economy, and by hiring the wrong people, and it will show up economy-wide over time. And there's a lot of research that backs this up. So in fact, they were passing up better performing women candidates. And so I think the remedy to that, because you think, well, then what can I do, right? And I think the remedy to that is A, be aware of it, and then B, you have to figure out what's important to you. Is it important to call something out? Is that the right thing to do? Or is it important to find other supportive people that can help you navigate that because you want to stay with a firm? Or is it that you move on because the culture is too toxic? You have to sort of, there's no playbook for all this, right? And then this was just exactly what I said. So sort of starting to conclude, just the thought that we can support each other, men and women, to rebalance this lost order and station of women. this is a LinkedIn post, and I wrote this feature in November of last year, and I do the annual energy edition for a magazine called DCEO Magazine, and I've done it for years, and we have awards connected to it. But this last year, I ended up interviewing 6 CEOs, and one of them was a data center CEO of a $55 billion company. And what I was showing is that there's all this new demand for energy, largely because of the digital economy that's growing and because of AI, right? And so he came out on LinkedIn, and I've never had a CEO do this, where he acknowledged myself and the magazine, DCEO, which happens to be a women-run magazine, in fact, in Dallas. The publisher is a woman, and all the key editors are, in fact. And so it was the first instance of this for me, and it was a tech CEO, right? And so I was just like, wow, that's really amazing, and so it just really struck me, and so just the idea that respect and acknowledgement, it's really simple, and it goes a long way. You know, it's really amazing how far that goes. So just personally, this is a journey. You know, I've definitely faced my share of hardship, obstacles, IP tampering, theft in my context with what I do, because I live by my IP basically, and I live by my wits. And so, you know, it's very easy online now, you know, with ChatGPT and being scraped and all this stuff. But interestingly too, with the research site I mentioned, I've endured 4 management changeovers. You know, I've endured 4 editors at the publication. Even, you know, that's 2 decades I've been with these organizations. So, you know, so I've seen some action. I've seen some bias. I've seen all sorts of things. But there's helping hands too. So every time I was knocked off a stage, I found another one to land on, a better one. And I picked my battles carefully, and I was patient, you know, when I could afford to be, or it mattered to be patient. So ways forward, just waking up. So I think just awareness of one's own agency and capacities, you know, develop and advance your skills. That's what I did. I absolutely focused on, you know, being a good writer. And funny enough, the reason I chose to be a writer was because I could stay home and have my own business and raise my daughter, who happens to be a software engineer. You know, and also use your voice in the right way at the right time. Just what I was talking about that, the stereotyping and the broken rung situation. Define your goal and state it to yourself and then others when necessary. And then find ways to collaborate with groups that you identify with that can offer help or experience. And then lastly, just take effort, you know, take steps, baby steps, you know, if need be. And, you know, I've been in energy for like 20 years, and that's sort of like my expertise. But, you know, I've been shifting more now into this space with the digital economy because of the energy use and AI, just because, you know, you just have to move with the times and evolve as well. You know, you can't stay stuck. So I will stop there, and if there's any questions.
How do you think that women in male-dominated industries can help support other women trying to enter that industry?
Right. Yeah, I think by, first of all, you know, being visible, being willing to, if it's public speaking, if it's mentoring, you know, being in, like, for example, my daughter, you know, she's being recruited and she's, you know, got options. And there was one industry that was way more male dominated than another option. And I'm like, so what? Just go do it. You know, just go be that woman. Just go be that girl, you know, that breaks ground, right? Especially when you're one of a few. I've been in male dominated industries my whole life. I started out in financial services in the 90s, male dominated. I was on some of the early crowdsourced sites. There were no men for years and years and years. And I was in energy, also male dominated. So I think you just have to sort of get a thick skin. And then I also think you do have to, share, support, right? That there's enough pie to go around for everybody. If you share instead of like, no, I've got to have this promotion, and I don't want to acknowledge her, and I don't want to. I've seen that movie a lot too. So I think you have to start with yourself, because you can't expect anybody else to be or behave like you would hope they would. So I think you really have to just be your own example and find that within yourself. And I think that's the message about the idea of waking up. You have to wake yourself up. You have to get your own resolve about it. So just fight the good fight. And take others with you. That's what I would say.
Earlier you mentioned the policy in Sierra Leone and India to reserve jobs for women.
Yeah.
Do you think that policy has a place in other parts of the world, or like a future in the United States, for example?
Right. Yeah, so our private sector, our corporations, they were kind of leading the push on including women in all sorts of roles. So I think there is absolutely an acknowledgement. It was called ESG, and I know now there's a lot of backlash about all sorts of things, right? But I think a lot of firms, in fact, are still adhering to those principles. You don't have to call it ESG, but it's just being environmentally, sensitive, including others, and increasingly firms know that they do need women voices. They need that diversification of talent and perspective, and so I absolutely see it happening on the private sector side. The government side, there was all sorts of policy, and some of that's being rolled back. But I don't think fundamentally that's going to change. I think the genie's out of the bottle, and you're not putting that back in, right? And in Europe, I would say Europe's probably a little more progressive, frankly, than the United States with it. And what's striking to me, and I think that's why I mention these developing economy cases, India absolutely recognizes that, we need to make our economy work to become, to reach our goals and our potential. We need everybody, because women are 50% of the economy, and these economies where women are absolutely subjugated. Look at those economies, I had a really hard-hitting quote about that, in fact, and I didn't know if I was going to say it, but I'm going to read it really quick. Okay, so this is about breaking free. So this was from Alma as well. So the rules and superstitious beliefs that degrade women continue to prevail in most countries. The primitive customs invented by men in the past to exploit and subjugate women remain alive to this day. Women and their minds have become entangled in the cobwebs of those customs. Even today, woman is caught in the illusory net of the nightmare she has experienced for so long. The memory of the horrors perpetrated against women throughout history runs very deep. Women have been hypnotized by their own minds. Women have to help themselves in order to extricate themselves from the magnetic field. This is the only way. And I think that's true. We have to free ourselves, right? You can't help free anybody if you don't free yourself, And funny enough, my daughter, I think, she's kind of an example of that, She's a Taurus, and, she as well, much more grounded than me. We mesh well. Anything else? Thank you. Thanks for having me.